confident years are a mosaic of events, intertwined, simultaneous, disorderly, the start of modern American history. During the years of Reconstruction, other things happened. 4 out of many. In 1867, we bought Alaska from Russia for 2 cents an acre. In 1869, our first transcontinental railroad opened. In 1871, the city of Chicago was almost destroyed by fire. In 1876, George Custer fought his last stand in the West. And in 1876, a great exhibition opened in Philadelphia to celebrate our first century as a nation, America's first World's Fair. The most popular exhibit at the fair was this one, the huge Corliss steam engine, the biggest in the world, a symbol of the power that would enrich America, power for the 8,000 machines on display in Machinery Hall. Among those 8,000 machines was this little device. Described as an improvement in telegraphy, it was usually ignored by the crowds visiting the exhibition. It was, in fact, the first telephone, patented earlier that year by Alexander Graham Bell. Just one of many new ideas that would ignite America's industrial growth after the Civil War. In 70 years before the war, 36,000 patents had been issued. In the next 30 years, over 400,000 patents were awarded. Of course, not all of these bright ideas worked. Some were as loony as this flying bicycle bed frame of 1885. Some, it's hard to know just what purpose the inventor had in mind. Some ideas were just ahead of their time, like this solar-powered printing press of 1882. Others were of their time. Electric light, the phonograph, telephone, typewriter, automobile, airplane, roll film camera, motion pictures, air conditioning, electric train, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, dishwashers, elevators, x-rays, radio, plastics. All either invented or first used in the confident years. More than one of these ideas came from the mind of one American, Thomas Alva Edison. In his time, he took out more patents than any other American ever has. Over 1,000.
Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
For Edison, inventing was a business.
I investigated the necessity of any invention before I attempted it. What I want is a perfect workshop.
So he built one, an invention factory at Menlo Park, New Jersey. Among its products were these. A box full of film on rollers called a kinetoscope. Edison developed the motion picture camera and projector and went into business making the first movies. In the first movie studio, a tar paper shed on wheels that could be turned to face the sun. They called it Black Maria. Edison made the first Western shot on location in New Jersey, The Great Train Robbery. Another entertainment industry started life as this little drawing. Edison scrawled a note on it to his mechanic.
Make this.
When it was finished, Edison turned a crank and shouted into it. 1877, the historic first recording of the human voice. And it was...
Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
The Dream of the Rarebit Fiend, played by the Edison Military Band.
Soon morning glory horns were sprouting in parlors all over America, and the record business was on. 2 years later, another industry. In the 1870s, America was dark at night. The country was lit by kerosene, cities by flaring gas flames. Here's the main street of Findlay, Ohio, around 1879. The year Edison changed all that. Until then, no one had been able to make an incandescent light burn for more than a few minutes. Edison tried 600 fibers before he found his filament.
It burned like an evening star for 45 hours.
October 19th, 1879, the electrification of America began. In 1882, the Edison Electric Light Company started service in New York City to 85 homes. The Wizard of Menlo Park had invented it all: generators, switches, fuses, lamps.
We will make electric light so cheap that only the rich will be able to burn candles.
The rich had no trouble affording candles or anything else. Most of the great American fortunes were made in the Confident years. Some of the men who made them have been called the robber barons. Their own words suggest why. The first, Cornelius Vanderbilt.
What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?
His son, William Henry Vanderbilt.
The public be damned.
The oil king, John D Rockefeller.
I have ways of making money you know nothing of.
The baron's banker, J.P. Morgan.
I'm not in Wall Street for my health. I owe the public nothing.
This famous photograph of Morgan was taken by Edward Steichen. Afterward, the photographer said,
"Meeting his black eyes was like confronting the headlights of an express train bearing down on you."
Bearing down hard on competition was the way these men became rich. They were helped by a series of panics and depressions that drove smaller men under. The Panic of 1873 wiped out over 20,000 small businesses. Another, 10 years later, swept away more of the competition. Then in 1893, the deepest depression of all, throwing millions out of work. Economic life in the Confident years was a roller coaster ride for many, soaring up, plummeting down. But for the robber barons, it was always up. They came out of every panic richer than before. The richest, for a while, was not only a captain of industry, he was a commodore, called that because he'd started his career commanding a fleet of steamboats in and around New York. Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt made his first fortune in the gold rush of the 1850s, not digging gold, but ferrying the gold diggers to California by way of Nicaragua. In the 60s, he used his shipping fortune to buy up Eastern railroads. By 1870, he joined them into the New York Central system. Who controlled the rails had the power. The crowning symbol of that power was the huge depot he built in 1871 far uptown on 42nd Street in New York City, the first Grand Central Station. When the Commodore died in 1877, he left a fortune estimated at $100 million. His son, William H., doubled it.
I am the richest man in the world. I would not walk across the street to make $1 million.
So he wouldn't have to cross the street to visit his married daughters. William built twin mansions on Fifth Avenue. His heirs continued the tradition. Vanderbilt townhouses occupied most of Fifth Avenue for 7 blocks. When they were out of town, they stayed in what they called cottages, like this one, the Breakers, in Newport, or Biltmore in Asheville, surviving monuments to a way of life in the Confident years. This little success story was part of the nation's need to move. Rail mileage went from 35,000 in 1865 to over 250,000 by the century's end. But behind the railroads was an even greater success, a greater fortune. The industry that made the rails. At first, the rails were iron. But in 1872, an iron maker named Andrew Carnegie had an almost religious experience. He witnessed the Bessemer steel converter in action.
The day of iron has passed. Steel is king.
In the year of 1867, less than 20,000 tons of steel were made in America. By 1901, the nation was producing over 12 million tons of steel, and most of it was made in the Carnegie steel mills. An American success story. Andrew Carnegie's first job at 13 paid him $1.20 a week, about a penny and a half an hour. He retired at 65 to his castle in Scotland on an income of $1 million a month for life. When J.P. Morgan bought Carnegie's steel mills to create the U.S. Steel Corporation in 1901, he told him,
Mr. Carnegie, I want to congratulate you on being the richest man in the world.
But the richest of the rich would be another man, whose name would symbolize them all, John D. Rockefeller.
God gave me my money.
In this pose, Rockefeller bears a resemblance to another character we've seen before. Thomas Nast's cartoon of The Brains. Rockefeller was the brains of the new oil industry. Oil had been discovered at Yale College in 1855, or rather, the value of oil was discovered by a chemistry professor there. He found it would burn. Before that, petroleum oil, called Seneca oil or snake oil, had been used only as an ingredient in patent medicines. To cure toothache or cancer, you either rubbed it on or drank it. Now, in the form of cheap kerosene, it would replace the expensive whale oil that had lit American homes for more than a century. The first well was sunk at Titusville, Pennsylvania, just before the Civil War. By the end of the war, Titusville had become an oil dorado in a rush for black gold. Overnight boomtowns sprang up. Some, like Red Hot and Pit Hole, also known as Sewer City, came and went in a few years as the wells dried up and the drillers moved on. Rockefeller hated the mess and chaos of the oil fields. His fortune was made in refining, a tidy fortune. He started his first refinery in 1863. By 1865, he was a millionaire. By 1876, he was able to say,
The oil business belongs to us. We have sufficient money to wipe out any concern that starts in this business.
Rockefeller's monster Standard Oil reached out to strangle competition, reached into Washington. It was bigger than the government. Here, Rockefeller lifts up the White House saying,
What a funny little government.
While in the background, the Capitol has become an oil refinery.
Individualism has gone. The day of combination is here.
The combination was called a trust, a Rockefeller invention. The trusts wore politicians in their pockets. They controlled Congress as the bosses of the Senate. By the 90s, the Senate was known as a millionaires' club, so many of its members being wealthy men representing big business. And a curious new invention called a road engine would boost Rockefeller's fortune into the billion range. The automobile ran on a waste product of oil called gasoline. By 1906, the date of this cartoon, John Davison Rockefeller had become Uncle John, America's new Uncle Sam, the symbol of national wealth and power. Whether these men were the robber barons they've been called, or the captains of industry they liked to be called, their lives and fortunes did symbolize the glitter of the confident years. They were rich, they claimed, because it was their brains, their money, their capital that was risked, gambling on America's industrial growth, building the mills and mines and factories. What they forgot or didn't mention was their wealth could not have been made without the power of people. New people flooding in from Europe and Asia to man their machines, fill their factories, run their railroads. The new immigrants, the roots of the riches of the confident years.